Hi there, tech people. I'm your host, Sean Worker, and it's great to have you join another show of the Adapters TechX, where we explore the business travel trends and fads in technology, services, mainly across travel, tourism, hospitality, restaurant, and all things services. Big shout out to Hunter Gatherer and the team with Art Lowry and No Vacancy Live, where we connect with Glenn Hausman in the Americas, and we cover the Americas, Europe, and the Middle East. Today, I'm delighted to have Gavin Bluett. Gavin is the partner at MacSweeney Law, based in Galway, Ireland. They're a specialist in basically everything. Gavin and his team specialize largely in startups, tech, med tech, sports, a full plethora of debt, restructuring, and anything that goes to basically underpin a company. He's been with the company now less than a year, but nonetheless has a long history in tech and startups and everything that goes with how to make those businesses do the stuff that matters, how to protect them, how to think about intellectual property, how to drive value while they're driving their product and bringing it to market. So there's a lot of insight into that. So we're delighted to have Gavin join us. If we can start with, just for grounding for the audience, tell us a little bit about your practice with MacSweeney Law. What do what do you specialize in?
Yeah, well, so as you said, look, the firm itself is a full practice, full commercial law firm. We also do the non-commercial things as well. But my team and myself, we focus on, look, we're not specifically tech focused. We will look after anything that has a sort of a commercial underpin. But my own personal interest that I've sort of developed over the last 10 years or so is heavily in the tech side of things, the med tech side of things as well. Where the med tech sort of interest comes from, as you know, Sean, my entire family are doctors. I'm the black sheep. I went the law route. And when I sit at a family dinner, they talk about medicine and I sit there like a bit of a daft looking fella. So my chance to talk to them is bringing it into a bit of life sciences of the med tech industry. So I have a personal interest in that. But in terms of the work I do and the team does, we'll take, advise early stage companies right from the moment of inception through their growth rounds, to commercialization of the products, ultimately to an exit or to sort of a very large investment round. So we cover the full spectrum of needs of a sort of a tech startup and its needs, and everything in between.
And so when you think about what that means, I mean, it's really hand-holding all the way from when they're protecting their IP all the way up to, okay, let's figure out how to get the funding round, maybe Series A through Series exit. Mm-hmm. What are, when you think about that, what are the types of potholes that you try and protect your clients against that they probably aren't aware of?
Yeah, well, I suppose the first thing, you're dead right. And ideally speaking, the earliest that we can get in touch with the company, the better. And of course, I'm going to say that as a lawyer, but really looking at it from the client's perspective, that is so important, because if you get the basics right and the foundations right at the outset, it makes the entire journey just so much smoother, as opposed to filling in the cracks and fixing the problems that have arisen from a bad starting point. So if you take the very first stage, would be for an early stage company to make sure that they have some documentation in place amongst themselves. So a founder's agreement at its most basic, setting out, who holds what.
It's funny how so many go into, because you go in with best intentions, it's all of our friends, and then you discover problems, and that can fray unless you have that framework, right?
Exactly. And the other side that you've kind of hitting it there is going in with friends and family and whatnot. But at early stages, a lot of tech companies, because there's a lack of money to pay people, there's sort of a desire to give away equity. And ultimately, you can find a situation with a very early stage company and all the things goes on. And then I suppose finally, you've hit on it as the IP side of it, which obviously in the tech side of things is crucial. And ideally speaking, you will find this not all that irregularly, but guys have gotten together, they started working on something pretty quickly. You've got some very, very intelligent guys developing stuff in the background, but then they might not have transferred that into the company they've ultimately created, or there's sort of a question mark over who owns the IP. Do I, the creator, own it? Does the company own it? And that creates problems further down when you want to scale, when you want to take on investment and bring on further investors. So
as a thought leader in the space, what's your advice from the investor side when they're getting into a startup and are in a different series?
Yeah, well, I suppose if it was something I've seen a lot more recently, and I think it's with the earlier stage, the investors who are willing to invest at an earlier stage in companies, which obviously is probably your money is most at risk when you're going in early stage, when it's at that concept, you're not sure if it's going to take off or not. But And I'm not sure if it's that people are less experienced investors. It's people that have got some money they want they want to put it somewhere that they're not used to, in the hope of getting a big return on it. But there's almost how would you describe it? A desire to de-risk the investment to a level that's unsustainable, where you're kind of wrapping the company up so much in so many restrictions and so many things they cannot do without the input of the investor, that ultimately it'll frustrate the people behind the company so much that it'll go nowhere. But there's definitely less money available for those early stage guys who really need some seed capital. And that's something I'm seeing, is people coming in, investors, and they're trying to have sort of board positions, sort of veto rights over things they really shouldn't have. They're sort of taking up, they're putting things in place that you wouldn't expect to see until a far more significant round, if that makes sense. So I think that's stifling the ability of those companies to sort of go on and grow their businesses. So that'd be one advice that I have for investors coming in at that early stage, is to, look, you better be willing to part with that money. It's not necessarily coming back, but you've got to give the guys the freedom. Certainly you want to have maybe quarterly reporting coming in so you know what's going on, but you can't be sitting at every board meeting, at every phone call, at every time the guy needs to spend 10 grand or 5 grand, So I think there's the ability to sort of come in, put the money in, and ultimately let go a bit. That'd be my advice.
So when you think about tips and takes for both sides and say, look, do this, not that, what comes to mind?
I would say documentation, right? I know that sounds boring being a lawyer, but if you agree something with anyone, put it in writing. The amount of times you see where people have sort of done sweetheart deals, or it's on a handshake because it's a good relationship, it's a family member, it's a friend, and you take whatever it might be, a company takes the money from them, but nothing's put in paper, and then things go on and they escalate, and it just causes issues. So document everything, number one. Number two, for both sides, good corporate housekeeping. So again, that comes down to your records, your documentation, but ultimately as well, I always say, if you do the simple things right, it'll make life so much easier. So things like, if you incorporate a company, you've got certain obligations, you've got filings to make with the revenue, you've got filings to make with the company's registration office. Please do them, because if you find yourself, when it comes to, you're a bit further down the road, you want to do some investment or take on some investment, or even if you want to invest in a company, from both sides of that, if I'm the company, I want to inspire confidence in an investor by showing, look, I run a tight ship. You can have faith in me. It's going to be okay. If I'm an investor, same thing. I might like what you've got. You might have a fantastic product, but I start taking a look at your actual record keeping, your housekeeping generally, and there's so many holes or so many things, loose strings, that it'll put me off and give me a concern, if you know what I mean. So that'd be the other one. And then, as I said, the IP, make sure the IP for both sides, that it's locked into the company, because that's going to be crucial for any scaling, any sort of a future fundraise, whatever, or an exit ultimately.
Gavin, I mean, the 4 pillars, you can't get simpler than that. I mean, you can actually sit on that. You actually got some structure. That's a 4-legged chair. You need a 3-legged stool when you got a 4-legged chair. It makes a ton of sense that for those out there that are either beginning or are just in Series A, 4 tips that you can rectify pretty quickly, even if you've got some difficult situations. So Gavin, thank you very much for taking the time and being so succinct with very meaningful baseline suggestions that sound simple, but they're actually pretty complex. So obviously, if anybody needs help, they obviously need to call you. So thanks a bunch for taking the time.
Pleasure. Thank you.
So, these are powerful tips, and I don't care really what business you're in, they're powerful. But these ideas of basically documenting and being transparent and delivering on the promise, but having meaningful conversations with investors that understand your road, your path, your timeline, without being stifled or crushed by unnecessary governance. In other words, you just got to get your product out the door in the most efficient way. And clearly having a meaningful business-oriented law partner is essential to your growth as much as getting the right coders. So on that note, certainly thank you again to the team over at Hunter Gatherer for powering this, Art Lowry, our friends at Glenn Hausman at No Vacancy. And please look for more. You know where these shows show up. We show up every Wednesday across all the channels, Spotify, Apple, Google, and of course, all stored on basically YouTube. So thanks again for taking the time. I'm your host, Sean Worker, and have a great week.